Wolfpack. Welcome back to Eunoia. It's your host, Sable Danielle. Today we are tuning in to part two of our conversation with Britni. Let's jump right in.
Was something that I wasn't necessarily comfortable with, but the dynamic of our relationship didn't make it more comforting. And so I made that decision. It was very difficult. Um, but what I will say is that the people that I have been able to count on and rely on, even if it's just for a, hey, are you feeling up to going out? Like just acknowledging that, for example, like we're in winter in the Midwest. Winter is the absolute worst season for me, symptoms wise. And so, having my friends who I used to go out with all the time adjust to, okay, well, Brittany may not be feeling good today. And they accept that or accommodate that. Or, um, like, one of my great friends is in the entertainment industry and he promotes events. And he will always let me know, hey, I have somewhere for you to sit. So like little things like that where it's just um, for every relationship that I feel has been compromised by my circumstances, it's made the other relationships I have gold because I'm like, okay, it's not a situation that's easy for me, let alone other people. But the people that make it easy are the people that I keep around me.
That's great. And I think it's also great that you recognize that everyone is not capable of giving the way that you give or giving the way that you expect or need them to. Um,
Definitely.
the quicker I think people realize that, the quicker we can come back to what you said you would tell your younger self is not everybody's meant to be there.
Right. And
So,
weed that out and it's okay. For a while, I sort of struggled with feeling like I was a burden, whether it was to my parents or to my sister or any of my close friends, because it's not a matter of if my symptoms will get worse. It's like a win. Like they're an unannounced guest that just show up and kind of derail things. So for a while I was worried about going out. What if I start having spasms and I'm eating in a restaurant? And those are things you can't hide. Even, now that I've been single for almost 5 years ish, I could be off by a year. Um, I worry about bringing that up, but I do bring it up very early if I'm talking to anybody. Like, I'm a single mom. I have this going on, that going on, that going on, because I don't want anyone to linger around me based on what their idea of me is. I want to tell them who I am point blank, and then they can make that decision if it's a fit or not. And it hasn't been a fit, but at the same time, like, I feel like for every mismatch, I'm closer to the person who will eventually feel like this is no big deal.
yeah. And I honestly, I've been single for some years too, and I think that that's the best way, like being upfront about who you are, like
Oh yeah.
face value. I think that's the best way to make sure that you don't end up in a situation where you feel like you're settling or you have to walk on eggshells or you're just not living up to what this other person is imagining of you.
Right.
I want to live
And
in
and
reality.
that's hard. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
So
agree.
you mentioned some struggles. How do you how do you get through those feelings of like struggles or the days that aren't the easiest for you, like mentally? How do you stay positive or get through that?
So I am a huge proponent of therapy. Even before um, my ex and I ended things, I had started seeing a therapist just because I felt so many different things. Like, okay, I was a newer mom, so my daughter was only like 1.5 when all of this started happening. So I felt like I was grieving my old life as I was taking on a new identity. And missing out on something, but it's sort of like you're not the person you've yourself to be anymore, for a variety of reasons. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something that people don't often talk about or process. I mean, we don't have our high school bodies anymore, or the energy we used to have, or the time. So all of these different things. Then on top of that, I had the added layer of the MS stuff, and I didn't even know it was MS yet. Then the dynamic of the relationship was shifting. And so I was like, you know what? I'm feeling all of these things, and I know I have a right to feel them, but I felt I needed someone who had no vested interest in me other than they were going to validate me. And so that's what I got from my therapist. It felt like a weight off of my shoulders. Like, yes, you're dealing with a lot. It is okay for you to feel tired. It is okay for you to cry about it. It is okay, because sometimes we feel like we're failing, or that we're guilty in some way of falling short standards that are so unrealistic that we set for ourselves, that society sets for us. And it's like, these people don't even know me. Why am I worried about, what everybody else thinks? So um, I've been with that same therapist for 5 years, and she's wonderful. Um, I do think talk therapy helps so much just because, you don't have the if you reach out to your mom or your sister or your best friend, like, yeah, you're supposed to gas me up because of who I am to you. But you go to this person who knows you based on what you've shared, who has no personal gain in telling you about yourself. So um, that has been a really good thing for me. Aside from that, um, like I said before, I feed off of my daughter's energy a lot. She is just so positive, and she's so stinking funny. Um, and so I just try to ask myself, like, what can I do to be in the best mind state to be the mom she deserves every day? And so that's usually enough to help me get my life together, especially if I'm, having a down day or whatever. It's like, okay, well, you might be having a bad day at work, but at 3:20 you're Brooke's mom and she needs you. So get it together. And I'm pretty good about that. I mean, I'll vent negativity to my sister, but I typically um, am good about making sure my emotional compartments correspond with where I'm at and what I need to accomplish, if that makes sense.
So it sounds like you're very aware, like you just make sure you're aware of your surroundings and yourself, your emotions, everything you're feeling, and that's really important.
Yeah, and I think so many people just are made to feel shame or guilt when they have an emotional reaction to something. Humans are emotional creatures. It is okay to feel things. And I just think that the stigma on therapy, mental health, even talking about it, is so real. It's come a long way though, but I do think that just acknowledging your feelings, being aware that you're feeling those things, and then taking a step back and assessing, like, what is it that's going on around me that makes me feel these things, and how can I make those experiences more positive? It's not, I had to move away from feeling like I needed to control the outcome of a situation
Yeah.
to controlling my response to the situations I'm putting in. So those are those were huge mind shift sets for me. So I would recommend anyone just kind of let go of control. We can only control our response.
Yes, I stand behind that 150%. I think that's very vital to happiness and just being able to thrive in life just as yourself.
Yes.
Um, you mentioned earlier that I'm drawing a blank, so maybe I'll come back to it. um, I will ask you instead, what made you decide to be vulnerable about your journey? Actually, wait, I'm sorry. I just remembered what I was going to say.
You're fine.
Earlier, you mentioned that it was hard to accept that like you're changing and like life changes. And I think that that's an important topic to talk about as well, because life is a ever changing cycle of evolution yourself, like everything outside of you changes. And I think we get so used to our life being how it is in the present moment that we feel like that's what it's going to be forever, but
Yeah,
it's not ever supposed to be that. That's not what how life is designed.
absolutely.
And so, like, the easier that we can recognize that relationships outside of ourselves, relationships within ourselves, and everything external is about evolving, um, it'll be easier maybe to lessen the control and go with the flow.
I would
So,
agree with that. Like, just people change. And I would argue that's one of the things that people ignore um, when they enter relationships, no matter what those relationships are. And you have to make peace with change. And if you're not the person for somebody else, whether it's a friendship, a romantic relationship, what have you, it's okay to grow apart. It doesn't mean that it was supposed to be this forever thing. And I think once we're able to make peace with, the things life shows us and the ways that we change, then those other changing aspects become way less damaging and way less frustrating. So I agree with you 100%. Like, view it all as an evolution, because even though it is hard when you're in it, when you look back, you're like, okay, there might have been some purpose there.
yes, I think there's purpose in everything. So, it's very important to try to find that. Okay, so back to what made you decide to be vulnerable about your journey?
So I never really while to talk about it, because I felt, again, like I still didn't have things under control. I'm still dropping glasses. I'm still knocking things over, still falling downstairs. I'm like, okay, let me kind of get a hold of this before I ever talk about it. But actually, the first group of people I talked to about it was my Avid class at Downers North. And for any listeners that aren't aware, Avid is a college prep program. It's designed to help kids who have any number of obstacles in the way of their post secondary plan. So, a lot of my students were first gen. Um, they had no one at home to explain to them about getting ready for college or what their options were. Some of my students, are first gen US kids. So, we had a lot of close relationships in that group. And so, because I had had that group since they were freshmen, this was their junior year, I had gotten diagnosed and then I was going to be out quite a bit for my testing. And so I just told them, and I cried like a baby. I explained to them what it was, and that was on like a Friday. When I came back to school that Monday, one particular student who I'm still in contact with today um, arranged an MS Walk team with our class for me downtown. And it was the cutest, sweetest thing I have ever experienced. And they've just sort of championed me. I mean, they're adults now, they're done with college. I still communicate with that group. They're super sweet. But when I told them, and I felt like okay after telling them, I was like, okay, this isn't something I should, hide, because it's going to be a bigger part of me. Um, but then it wasn't until like a couple years later that um, I was talking with some friends, and they actually told me, well, why don't you start a blog? I was like, a blog for like strangers to see? Are you kidding me? Because I'm typically a private person, um, especially with my writing. So I tried it, and I was like, okay, this is kind of nice. And so I haven't in a long time, but the reason I started was because at the time one of my bigger symptoms was memory. And so I was like, okay, I want to make sure I'm putting my thoughts down so that in the event my memory compromises or loses some of these things, I want my daughter to have a written record of these things that I was thinking and feeling. And so that's kind of It's me explaining things to her in the moment, in the event that one day I can't. And so it was very relieving. I just I haven't made time to write post COVID, so um, that was kind of, my friends told me, okay, try this, and that was huge for me because I would talk about it in my safe spaces, but I had never stepped outside of my comfort zone like that before.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you doing that because there's so many people who are living with chronic illness or who just resonate with your story on many different levels that it's probably important to talk about so that they can feel like other people can feel like they're not the only one in the world going through things, which is
Right.
why I created this space. So I'm definitely glad that I found you and found your blog post. And
Thank you.
you're a great writer. Um, okay, so if you could give any advice to people who are dealing with the same things that you're dealing with or who struggle with illness, what would you say to them?
I would say you need to consciously remind yourself that your illness isn't the summation of your identity. So while it's part of it, it's not all of it. Um, like there was a Britney before Britney with MS, and that Britney still exists. She's just been impacted by something else. And so I think you have to be intentional about um, continuing your life with this passenger that you had involuntarily now, but try not to give it as much space on your journey as it needs, because when you give things space, sometimes they can weigh you down and prevent you from getting where you need to go. But I think that, the way that I don't want to say embraced MS because me and MS are still beefing. Um, the way that I've accepted MS has allowed me to continue my life unapologetically, but still be realistic about what it could bring to me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that gives a lot of power too. It's not very easy to accept where you are in life, especially if you're not necessarily happy with what has happened along your journey. So,
Yeah.
switching gears a little bit, you mentioned being a mom.
Mhm.
If you're open to talking about it, are there any cycles that you would like to kind of break with your daughter or traits, things, traditions that you want to instill in her?
So as far as cycles, like you, I still am, very critical of myself. Like I think about how I viewed myself, even in it's like cringy because you're just in that phase where you feel very much on display, but oftentimes you're the one picking yourself apart. It's not anybody else. Um, so I guess I would want to break that cycle. I see a lot of myself in Brooke, and I just told her this the other day. And while it's wonderful, it's like, yeah, that's me right there. There are parts of that where, I want her to guard her heart. She has such a big heart. She always wants to help kids. Um, she acts like the grandmother in her second grade classroom. And while those are all great qualities, I also want her to protect herself or at least cushion herself from being disappointed by people that don't live the same she does or don't view life the same way that she does. Because if she could be friends with everybody, make sure everybody has enough snacks and is happy and laughing, oh my gosh, she would make sure of it. But I think it's very hard for her to understand right now that one is an empathetic person, or not everyone is concerned about if the kid next to them in class is comfortable with their sight. So she has a caring heart. I don't want her to lose that, but I want her to be mindful as she takes on the rest of her goals and dreams and things, that there are people that will view that as weakness and try and use that against you.
Yeah.
I think that's my biggest concern is that I'm very proud of the person that she is and the person that she continues to be, but I want her to not anticipate disappointment, but to acknowledge that it's looming and then, prepare herself so that it's more of a cushion than a blow if and when it happens.
That's great because I think that if I would have heard more things like that as a child, maybe I wouldn't have been as critical with myself. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm 30 something and I still battle that.
Yeah.
I'm a lot better at it now, but when you get so used to like thinking a certain way or being a certain way, it's very hard to just release it.
Absolutely.
And so, how do you stay balanced with everything that you have going on? You're a teacher, your mom. I don't know what else you're doing. Being a lot.
I I will honestly just look at my calendar like I haven't done anything fun in a few weeks. And I will force myself to. There was a time where I didn't. I just be like, all right, and I'm tired. So I do feel like you have to draw some lines in the sand. So, for example, when I'm at work, yes, I'm still Brooke's mom, but there's nothing I can do for her while she's in the care of her teacher and while I'm at work. Obviously, unless there was some sort of emergency and I had to leave. But while we're in those two different places, I can't do anything for her until I pick her up, right? So my focus is going to be the kids in front of me that I'm entrusted to teach. And so I've sort of been able to compartmentalize my identity. Like, I miss 8 a.m. until 3 o'clock ish. I'm mom any other time. Um, then, if my daughter's with her dad and then I'm out being social, okay, I'm Britni again, right? So I do think that
Uh-oh. Might have lost her. Unfortunately, I am going to hang up and try to reconnect.